Start as a subcommittee. If we could try to keep that door closed. I know we've got a standing room only crowd. I believe that will resolve itself. We are going to take a matter out of order, but before we start, we do have 3 proposed consent items. Item 1, SB 875 by Senator Gaines. Item 9, SB 1158 by Senator Anderson. And item 13, SB 1265 by Senator Morlock. We will take a motion on that when we have a quorum. But if any of you are here on those matters, unless you just enjoy sitting through Senate Judiciary Committee, you don't need to stay because those items are on the consent calendar. So again, we'll start as a subcommittee. And other than the first item, which we are taking out of order, items are heard in file order. So Senator Huff, if you would like to come forward. Senator Huff is now the joint author on a measure that was originally introduced by Senator Runner, who was not here, and he had a conflict, and given that those circumstances, which are somewhat unusual, we've agreed to take that item out of order. So Senator Huff, this is file item 16, SCA 12, regarding the University of California. The rules of engagement in this committee are we'll have 2 members or 2 witnesses testifying 2 minutes each, and then all other witnesses rather in support will be asked to come up and give their name, affiliation, and obviously if they're in support to say so. We'll then have the opposition come up, 2 witnesses, 2 minutes each, and then all subsequent witnesses in support to again give their name, affiliation, and position, and very briefly in opposition to the measure, and then we will open it up for discussion at that time. So with that understood, Senator Huff, good afternoon.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Thanks for your flexibility on this. I'm here today to represent and present SCA 12 on behalf of Sharon Runner and myself. SCA 12 is a constitutional amendment which addresses the admission practices of the University of California. If approved by the voters, the measure would reiterate that the primary purpose and obligation of the University of California is to serve the students of California. While UC system admission websites proclaim that as a public institution we prioritize admission of California residents, doubts have been expressed by the public and the press, and most recently by the California State Auditor. Last month, the California State Auditor published a report titled, UC, its admission and financial decisions have disadvantaged California students. The report concludes that the University of California has in fact failed to give California students priority, opting instead to pursue higher tuition paid by out-of-state and international students. At several UC campuses, non-residents are granted admission at a dramatically higher rate than California students. These first 2 charts, and you see some behind me, which are in your packets also, hopefully, demonstrate the behavior. Please take a moment to note what's happening to top colleges in other states. You'll see that they admit their state students first. UC prospective applicants are advised that California residents must have a high school GPA of at least 3.0, while non-residents are held to a higher threshold of 3.4. While these representations are designed to assure California that state residents come first, there's compelling evidence that the University of California has not adhered to its own articulated policy. The chart dealing with GPAs tells the story for California. Since 2010-11, out-of-state students have gained admission with lower standards than California students. Between 2010 and 2015, the system-wide number of California undergraduates has declined while the number of non-resident undergraduates has surged by more than 20,000 students. The non-resident fees paid by these students provide the University of California almost $500 million, yes, $500 million in additional revenue each year. The UC's open pursuit of the $24,000 in additional fees paid annually by each non-resident student is concerning. Increasingly, California students and parents share the perception that seats at the University of California are being sold to the highest bidder, that California residents are being passed over for less qualified non-residents who are willing to pay more. California students and their families are entitled to further assurances that their applications are processed fairly and that non-residents do not gain an admission advantage because they're willing to pay an additional $100,000 over 4 years. The problem giving rise to SCA 12 is not whether the University of California can legally give academic preference to California students. It is whether the University of California recognizes an obligation to do so. The analysis brings up a good point about the use of the word priority in the SCA. Senator Runner and I believe there is value in being as clear as possible. Perhaps the best way to do that is to go back to the UC admission guidelines that were employed prior to 2011 and described in the master plan. The master plan provided that state universities should only admit non-residents who possess academic qualifications that are equivalent to those of the upper half of residents who are granted admission. Guidance can also be found in UC Berkeley's admission data for 2015 published on the school's website. The data included in your packet demonstrates that out-of-state and international students admitted to Berkeley in 2015 had higher composite grades and test scores than admitted California students. Public confidence can be restored with greater transparency and accountability regarding non-resident admission rates and qualifications with this SCA. This constitutional amendment is an important reminder as to UC's obligation to the taxpayer and our state's students. Our students and parents deserve better. Let's support them by ensuring our institutions, which were designed to serve them, are obligated to California students first. I have Charles Fennessy here today on behalf of Senator Runner to help with technical questions that may come up. I would ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Senator Huff. And since we now have a quorum, let us take advantage of that. Madam Secretary, let's establish the quorum. Please call the roll.
Jackson?
Here.
Jackson here. Morlock? Morlock here. Anderson? Here. Anderson here. Hertzberg? Leno? Here. Leno here. Monning? Here. Monning here. Wachowski?
All right, a quorum is present. Why don't we go ahead and if we could have a motion to adopt the consent calendar, which is items 1, 9, 13, motion by Senator Morlock. Please call the members.
Jackson?
Aye.
Jackson, aye. Morlock? Morlock? Morlock, aye. Anderson? Aye. Anderson, aye. Hertzberg? Leno? Aye. Leno, aye. Monning? Monning, aye. Wachowski?
All right, the vote is 5-0. We'll hold the roll open for the absent members. Thank you, Senator Huff. Any witnesses in support of this item? Any witnesses here in support? If you would, you have an opportunity to speak. 2 minutes. And if you'd identify yourself. Good afternoon.
Madam Chair, members, Nadia Leal Carrillo with the University of California. The university does not have a position on SCA 12 at this time as we are trying to really get an understanding of the legal implications associated with the bill's language. I want to first clarify that from a policy standpoint, we do believe we already comply with the provisions of the bill. Specifically, 85% of our undergraduates are Californians, and we enrolled a higher percentage of California students than required in the master plan. We also guarantee admission for California residents, something we do not guarantee for non-residents, and we require a higher GPA for non-residents than resident students. Also, we have currently capped non-resident enrollment at 3 of our campuses, specifically UC Berkeley, Los Angeles, and San Diego. But however, we have several concerns. First,
Could I just indicate, we have more people than we are permitted to have in this room. So we're going to ask, and the sergeant will accompany you, and I apologize for this, because there's no fun in being outside in a hallway watching proceedings on TV, but because we are out of compliance, if you will, I would like to ask those of you who are standing, and if there are no seats available, if you can take a seat, great. If not, if you would please go out to the hallway. There is a TV set up there where you can watch the proceedings, but we're not going to have people standing. I apologize for that. Them's the rules. If you'd hold on 1 second and then go back and repeat that sentence again. Thank you. Why don't you go ahead and...
And so I want to take this opportunity to mention to you some of the areas of concerns that we've identified. First, it appears that SCA 12 would include all of our programs, and that includes our graduate and professional schools, which is a concern specifically because our graduate and professional schools program enrolled the most competitive students, regardless of residency, consistent with other state universities. Also, the bill in not defining exactly who is considered a resident, we believe AB 540 students and veterans from other states who are considered residents for tuition purposes would in fact are treated as non-residents because they can't establish residency. We believe the bill could greatly disadvantage these students. And as noted in your committee analysis, we also agree and believe that the measure leaves us vulnerable to civil actions laid out in the analysis. With me today is UC's Counsel, Chief Deputy Counsel Steve Drone, who can speak to these concerns in more detail if you wish. And I also have our Associate Vice President of Undergraduate Admissions, Steve Handel, who can also help answer some of the questions on undergraduate admissions. I do want to conclude by saying that UC is fully committed to enrolling more California residents. We're proud to be a public university, and in fact, we are actually in the process of enrolling an additional 5,000 California residents, and that's a direct result of your support for additional state funding support for enrollment growth. And so we hope to continue to be a partner with the state in future years so we can continue to grow our California students population. Thank you for your time.
And you indicated you have witnesses here who can, are they for technical purposes?
For technical purposes, if there's any questions.
All righty. Senator Leno?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry, I did not get your name.
My name is Nadia Leal Carrillo.
Beautiful name. I don't know that I can say it. You had mentioned that an undocumented student who's raised and schooled here in California would be considered an out-of-state student. Did I hear you correctly?
Correct.
By whose accounting?
So
This measures? The measure before us?
So under current law, AB 540 students are not eligible to establish residency, but the state, as a result of passing legislation, AB 540 provides for a tuition exemption. So the university recognizes AB 540 students as residents for tuition purposes. And so in the bill, one of the areas that have note of concern is that who is essentially falls under the category or the definition of residency, since it's not specified. With the diversity that exists in our state, we are concerned that it may leave out populations like AB 540 students.
Thank you. So that's a question I can certainly ask the proponents. You had mentioned that 85% of our UC students currently are in-state. Do you know how that compares to 5 or 10 or 30 years ago?
If I may, I could bring up our Associate Vice President of Undergraduate Admissions.
You know, I think we're actually a little ahead of ourselves because I haven't asked for the opposition yet.
Right, okay.
So what I'd like to, because you're kind of a tweener there, right? You're not for or against, but you do have some concerns. So are there any other witnesses here in support of this measure? Are there any witnesses in opposition? Okay, so I guess at this point we can open it up for discussion, and if you would bring whoever are the experts who can answer technical questions. I think we all have some, so it would be helpful to have you join us, and then we can ask some questions of the proponents, because I think those are issues of concern to all of us. So would you like to give up your seat to this gentleman? Okay.
Thank you.
It's not that hot, but it's a hot seat, but okay. All right, so Senator Leno, if you'd like to go ahead.
Great, thank you. It was mentioned that 85% of our UC students currently are in-state. Do we know how that compares to 5 or 10 or 30 years ago?
But we've always had a certain percentage of international and out-of-state students that hovered around anywhere between 5 and 10%, probably a decade ago.
And prior,
I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Forgive me. My name is Stephen Handel. I'm the Associate Vice President for Undergraduate Admissions at the University of California.
Thank you. Okay.
so if I do the math, then the answer to that question is about 5 years ago, you think it might have been closer to 90%?
That's correct.
Okay. Can you go back any further than 5 years?
I'd be happy to provide the data for you. I don't know it right offhand. We've always had a certain percentage, but it has increased in the last 10 years, as the data show.
Okay. And do you know how this 85% figure compares with some of the other major state public universities across the country?
Yeah, it's actually much lower. The University of Michigan, don't quote me on these statistics, and again, I'm happy to nail them down, but they're in the 30% area. The University of
Actually
Virginia.
higher. I spoke to Michigan today. I'm Steve Drown, Senior Counsel for the University of California.
Excuse me, questions, answers through the chair, please, if you want to. Okay, question is the percentage compared to other schools, and your answer, sir, was?
Lower.
The
The University of California's percentage is lower than some comparable universities, public universities across the country.
The question was how do we compare in terms of our in-state students? Is the number higher than other states or lower than other states?
The percentage is higher for
In-state higher.
In-state higher.
Right.
Thank you. Sorry.
And you, sir, wanted to add something to that as well?
Forgive me, I was just on the phone with the University of Michigan today and learned that for the last 5 years, they've been consistently at 45% out-of-state students, and it's approaching 50-50.
So if I understand correctly, our out-of-state students are approximately 15%, which is probably somewhat higher than 10 or even 5 years ago.
That would be correct.
A little bit higher. And you're saying in other states, our 15% compares to 45%
At Michigan.
at Michigan. Okay. And do you have any information on any other states, Virginia or Pennsylvania or any of these other?
Again, my understanding with the University of Virginia is that it's higher as well. Their out-of-state percentage is higher than our
higher.
percentage,
Okay.
probably
25
in
to
the
30%.
30s.
Right. And do you see, have an understanding of what the word, and I will be asking this of the proponents as well, of what the word priority means? So does that mean if you have two identical students, same in extracurriculars, same in test scores, same in grade point, one is in-state, one of out-of-state, does priority mean with this proposal in our Constitution, there'd be no choice but to take the in-state? Or does it mean that we prioritize that before we take any out-of-state, we consider all the applicants who are in-state? Do you know what priority means?
I have yes, in fact, I do. We take we fill every seat with a California resident for which the state provides funding. So we take all those students, and when we hit that target, that limit, then we take non-resident students. Priority for us means that a student who is not a California resident has to hit a higher GPA and also does not get a guarantee to the system. So we find a place for every UC eligible Californian somewhere in the UC system. We do not guarantee that to out-of-state students.
Okay. And
Can we keep those doors closed, please? Sergeant, excuse me. If we could keep the noise down, because it's kind of, if people could talk up a little bit here, the noise from outside is really creating quite an echo. Thank you.
I think if I heard Senator Huff correctly in his presentation of the bill, the suggestion or the statement that it's documented out-of-state students with lower GPAs have been accepted, with higher in-state GPAs being rejected.
It's more complicated than that, if I could be allowed to explain. The auditor's findings have been have been found wanting, and we're on record as disagreeing with a great deal of what they are using in terms of measuring qualifications. At the University of California, we have a comprehensive review process. We have 14 criteria that we use in evaluating all applicants. GPA is simply one of those. They, if you will, took that particular statistic and used that alone without the context of the other factors.
Got it. I had earlier asked you about the meaning of priority. You gave me a response to how you currently define priority. Do you understand how priority is defined in this proposed constitutional amendment? What it would mean to you? How it would impact you?
It's not altogether clear to me how it would impact us at this point. It seems very undefined, frankly.
It seems undefined. Okay.
For me.
And then my last question, Madam Chair, thank you for your generosity here. I think I understood also that the 85% in-state figure is higher than that which is called for in the master plan. What does the master plan say about in-state, out-state?
Great question. So let me clarify. The master plan says that we need to take the top 12.5% of all high school graduates in California who apply. Right now, we're taking about 14%. Our most recent calculations indicate that we're probably taking 14% of California high school graduates who are UC eligible.
All right. And then just lastly, a brief comment. I think we're having this conversation. The reason Senator Huff is here with this proposal is because we, the state, have cut back so dramatically on our general fund support of what we all recognize as probably one of the most important institutions in our state, which is renowned worldwide, which is clearly our economic generator, and we have continued to cut back, cut back, cut back. I don't have the figures in front of me. In fact, I think I probably have it in my phone. That the percentage of your entire revenue 40 years ago, somewhere in the neighborhood of 70% came from the general fund. I think it's now as low as, in very rough numbers, as low as 30% of represented by general fund.
I believe it's lower than that, but I can get the exact figure for you.
And given that we have seen the percentage of out-of-states tick up from 5 to maybe 10 to 15% in recent years, correlates directly with our cutting of general fund support. So I'll have some questions for the proponents later too, but thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Very good. Senator Morlock, you had some questions.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. With that perception, that's what's driving all of this. Mr. Handel, I want to thank you for your presentation to Budget and Fiscal Review Committee Sub 1, to myself and Senators Block and Allen, and you made a really good presentation. One of the handouts you had was SAT scores. That doesn't appear to be in the materials that were provided by the author, but this chart was provided, which shows that there is a number of students that are being admitted that were lower than the California test scores, and I don't recall discussing this during our committee meeting. Are you familiar with this chart?
Oh, I'm very familiar with that chart.
Just help me out. Did I miss it in the discussion?
No, it's something that we vigorously disagree with. What they have used to find quote-unquote unqualified students is based on a definition that no one actually uses. They believe they are using the master plan definition. The master plan definition says, from 1960, mind you, says that we need to take the upper half of students in the eligibility pool system-wide. If you're a non-resident, you have to hit that high mark. It does not say we need to do that by campus. They did that by campus and came up with the 16,000 number. So we disagree because the definition is, in fact, not one that anyone uses.
So then we're trying to fix a perception problem. Do you have a recommendation other than this one to make sure that everyone feels that Californians are getting a fair shake and that we don't feel like someone else is getting preferential treatment? What's your solution?
That's a great question. Thank you. Before the audit report came out, we partnered with the state and are, in fact, addressing the very issues I know that everyone's concerned about. I'm the admissions guy. I get letters just like you do. We are growing by 5,000 California residents this fall 16. In that 5,000 students, they will reflect more than ever before the diversity of the state. In addition, we are slowing the rate of growth of non-residents. We've capped non-residents at the 3 largest and most prestigious campuses, and we continue to guarantee a place for every California eligible student. So even if one bought all the arguments in the audit report, and certainly I don't, nonetheless, the partnership with you is ameliorating the very concerns I think that they have raised.
Thank you, Mr. Handel. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, and I think in response to that, the university would like to see us recommit the investment that we made many years ago when I know my husband was able to attend the University of California for free. When I think the state put in about 57 cents to every dollar, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Chair of our Budget Committee, it might be down to 17 cents, and yet we continue to have the finest public university system in the country, if not the world, which I think is a tribute to the efforts that are made. And I think my good colleague here, Senator Morlock, a man who appreciates numbers well, understands that to try to do more with less is always a challenge. And certainly we want our students to be able to attend this university system. We want it to continue to be the best in the world, and I know that there are just so many ways that you can put a square peg into a round hole. But there is, I think, a concern, and I think that's what we're hoping to address here today. And with that, I'd like to ask Senator Huff to respond to the question about who is a resident. I think here in California, we recognize that we've got wonderful young talent that is both here documented and lifelong but undocumented, and we've made educating all of our young people a priority for us. So where does the bill stand on that issue is my first question.
Well, let me answer your question first with a statement that appears on the UC Admissions website. As a public institution, we prioritize admission for California residents. So I didn't contemplate that residents would be so complicated, and appreciate the questions from the senator from San Francisco, and certainly willing to work with the UC on what constitutes a resident as currently is being practiced with the 2 exemptions that they talked about. If I could address a few other things, Madam Chair, that were brought up. If I could address a few other things brought up, I'd like to go back to just what this SCA is actually advocating for, and it was touched on by the senator from San Francisco as well. It basically just says instead of the university promise of a high-quality college education, it adds high-quality college education by ensuring that priority in admissions is given to applicants who are California residents. So residence is key to that. And priority is key to that you asked about before. And we're willing to clarify what priority means. What that means right now is, and some of the data is a little confusing, because while they admit them into the system, they refer 10,000 students to UC Merced. And only 2% of those that are referred to UC Merced go there. So system-wide, their data can show that they're admitting them, but the reality is the students don't go because they want to be at the higher achieving education. So when you look at the higher achieving education and not system-wide, you have 25% non-state students. So, you know, there's statistics and there's darn statistics.
We could be splitting hairs here. You know, I guess you could make the argument that we get good students and we try to direct them to the newest of the universities of California and try to invest in that university, which I believe the state has done. It's still a University of California. I mean, how far are we going to micromanage as a legislature, or how far are we going to have the public micromanage through? This isn't a piece of legislation. This is a constitutional amendment, and now I'm getting concerned because we're really getting into the sort of the kind of the, you know, the muddle of the technicalities of, well, do we count them if they get into Merced because they don't go there? Or how about Riverside because X percentage don't go there? Or how about at Berkeley where we have a higher percentage of people at one point or the other? This is either a system-wide issue or it isn't. And my fear now is that we're really starting to confuse what I think is a an important topic. And so I'm a little concerned now, as a constitutional amendment, that we're going in a direction that really is splitting hairs that I don't think it behooves any of us, and certainly not in the best interests of Californians. So if you want to go in that direction, you're creating some real problems for me that are otherwise a little bit, more global, which I think is what a constitutional amendment should be considering. Do you want to take that back, or do you want to?
Yeah, no, I think that's actually the crux of what we're talking about here. We have flagship universities in California that have a market price, and the UC system is selling those to foreigners. That's the reality. That's why you have 25% outside, and we take our own highly qualified students who have met all the criteria, many of them first-generation college attendees, and we ship them off to Merced. But they want something better, and we say, sorry, we're filled up with out-of-staters. That is the problem we're trying to address. And so while I'm
You have some data on that that can specifically prove all that?
all kinds of data on it.
And then would you present, I mean, those are pretty strong allegations. I'd like to hear them, and then I'd like to hear the university respond.
And Madam Chair, if I could also say, we're underscoring what the state auditor came up with in their findings. This is not Senator Huff coming out with my harebrained ideas, which I admit I've done before, but this is not one of those times. So it is trying to.
But just because we have an auditor's report, and this is a constitutional amendment. We're not talking about a piece of legislation. We're talking about a constitutional amendment in dealing with the University of California, where there was an auditor's report. I would like to hear what your position is on this, and then I think we need to give the University of California, which the last I looked was given a certain autonomy, and probably in some measure for good reasons and some not necessarily. But if we're going to upset this entire apple cart, I think the least we can do is let the university respond after we hear what your representations are and concerns.